Then Jacob, verse 20, made a vow. And the man said, if God would be with me and watch over me, if he would feed me and he'd clothe me and return me back to my house, then he'll be my God. And then the last line, you see it, and of all that you give me, I will give you the sacred tenth. There's no chapter in Genesis that says, hey, Jacob, thou shalt give a sacred tenth, and yet he gives it maybe because one of the ways that we do learn how to give the sacred tenth is that our mothers and fathers pass it down to us. Henry Lansell is a British scholar who has researched every aspect of giving. His finding is fascinating to me. Lansell says in pre-biblical times as well as biblical times, every nation, and he begins to name some of them, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, the Arabians, the Ethiopians, the Greeks, the Romans, all had other gods. And historically, you can find this, that each worshiper gave their God a sacred tenth. Did you hear what I said? Maybe you misunderstood me. We claim to worship a God that woke us up this morning and kept us and sustained us. But these were people that worship a God that you had to prop up on a stage, and if they lost their eye, they had to put the eye back in the socket. And if they lost a hand, they had to remend the hand to the body. If the wind blew their God over, they had to go out and pick it up and prop it up on every leaning side. And they gave a sacred tenth to their God. Dr. Brooks, an Egyptologist, tells the story of how Egyptians gave a tenth to their gods. And if you know anything about Egypt, the gods of Egypt, they were in plenty. It was a lot of them. They had gods for everything. I mean, moon god and sun god, that's one thing. But they had crocodile gods, alligator gods, fly gods, frog gods. You know this because of the story of the plagues. All these gods. And these people gave a sacred tenth to a fly god, crocodile god, frog god, bird god, reptile god. They gave a sacred tenth. So I know what you're saying. Hey, I didn't wake up this morning wanting to hear about Egyptians, worshipers giving their God a sacred tenth. It may not be interesting to you, but it is to me. It is to me because here these people, I don't know where they learned it, other than out of God's creation, he puts in us something that is natural to give back to our God. They have a God that they do not claim as our God. That God crawls around and fly in the sky and slither down in the ground, and they give a sacred tenth, and yet we will come in and blow the roof off the house talking about God woke me up this morning, started me on my way, gave me a job, watch over me, and when it's time to give the sacred tenth, to have the nerve to say, I ain't giving nothing. That's just examples. Let's turn the next page to the Old Testament now. And there are a couple of examples here. In Leviticus 27, that's at the very end of the chapter, and the book for that matter, something happens that we might want to give attention to. So, there's no chapter, but here the tithe, the sacred tenth, is mentioned. beginning at verse 30 in chapter 27 of Leviticus. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Third book of the law books. Do you see verse 30, what it says? Let's see if our Bibles read the same, because you might say, this is the only Sunday Pastor West started making stuff up. Ready? Relax, not chill. Remember we learned that last week. Fret not. Fret not. This is the same Bible that you got fret not out of. See how live you came when I said fret not? Same Bible, all right? So here let's read verse 30. Just a little bit of it. Let's start. A tithe of everything from the land. Wow. So the sacred tenth comes from everything. Look at the everything that the sacred tenth comes from. The land, the grain, the soil, the fruit, the trees. And then it tells you where the ownership is. It belongs to the Lord. And then it's holy to the Lord. That word means set aside. It's holy unto the Lord. It ought to be set aside for the Lord. And then it gets gooder than that, though. Whoever would redeem any of their tithe must add a fifth of the value of it. Everything tithe of the herd, the flock, every 10th animal that passes by, the shepherd's rod will be a holy to the Lord. That is, when everything is passing by, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, minus 1, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4. And God is so good, he let you have 9 and he only takes 1. Preach, Pastor West. And so here he gives us the example that the Lord expects you. And you know, he expects you to do it joyfully, not begrudgingly. He expects you to wave that iPhone or whatever you have and be glad to be able to give it to it, because you know this: everything belongs to the Lord. Oh, it all belongs to him. And so why does he say bring the sacred tenth? For one reason. It's not to build up budgets and buildings and take care of property. We give the sacred tenth because it builds up men, it builds up women. It makes us better people. It frees us from being covet or covetous. You know what coveting is? That's why I like teaching in this church. Y'all ask all the right questions. If I ask you a question, would you answer honest? I want to see it. How many men here you have more than, if you're wearing a suit, you have more than the one suit that you have on? I have more than one. You know, in church, we just got the light on me. You think everything's a setup. Thank you, men, those of you that answered. I have more than one. Let us go home and write over our closet, we are coveters. Sisters. See, men always tripping. Women make church real fun. Sisters, help me. Help the brothers out on honesty, please. How many of you have more than one dress hanging in the... I know you do, because my closet is about that big, and the rest of it belongs to Miss West. And I went in and got an engraved sign and hung it right on her side. Thou art a coveter. Covenant is an interesting word. It means wanting more, getting more of what you already have enough of. Now this morning, I don't think God's going through your closet pulling out suits and dresses, and I don't believe that. But it does serve as an ocular demonstration when you look at what's hanging there, for us to say, if I can spend what I spend for this closet on Sunday morning, I have no problem giving God my sacred tenth. Preach, Pastor Ray. And those that do will tell you it's a joy. It's a joy. It is. I mean, you sit down and say, I gave my fraternity my dues. That ain't no joy. That just keeps you in voting right. I gave my alumni dues to my alma mater. That's great. Support it. But there's no joy like when you show up on Sunday and you give your sacred tenth. And whatever that sacred tenth is, you know that God is making a deposit in heaven, and you can leave saying, I got treasure in heaven. You can't put $100 on a soul that gets saved. I'm done now. One last thing. There is an example. There is this expression. I want to close in the New Testament now with how Jesus echoes what he too has learned from his childhood. Look at Matthew 23. That's in the New Testament. That's the first gospel. And in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is going to make a statement. You may want to read it with me this morning. Give you a moment to get there. He's given all these woe statements. You know what woe is? Lee Zachary Maxey, we grew up together. Zach is a PhD in New Testament. And I said, Zach, what is the definition of woe? He said, Ralph, woe technically and etymologically means ooh-wee. So Jesus is giving these ooh-wee statements. And in verse 23, he comes to these words. You want to read it with me? Let's just read it. Ooh-wee to you. Teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites, you give a tenth of your, and now notice what he mentions. When he talks about these spices, he's talking about spices like cooks have on their shelf that they put for seasoning ingredients in meals. That's all he's getting to. So he says, you give your tenth of your spices, because remember in Leviticus, everything belongs to the Lord, and mint, and dill, and cumin, but you neglect the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Jesus lived in the most tithe-conscious century in the world. The world is known. Isn't that amazing? And the chief criteria of the Pharisees for service to God, because they wanted to do something tangible, was to give the sacred tenth. Two things. The Pharisees always had some bad stuff to say about Jesus. Now, for those who don't know who the Pharisees are, Pharisees is a religious sect. Best way to remember them, the Pharisees are fair, you see. And the Sadducees are sad, you see. The Pharisees are fair, you see, because they thought that they could do everything by the law. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and anybody that doesn't believe in a living Savior is sad, you see. So Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, who were highly religious and very legalistic, and they always had something bad to say about Jesus all the time. Remember, they said on more than one or two or three or four or five occasions, why are you doing good on the Sabbath day? And then they really like to get him on this one. And why do you hang out with these people that drink? And why do you eat with sinners and publicans? But they never, of all the things they accused Jesus of, they never accused him from withholding the sacred tenth. It's by implication, you know he did withhold it, because if he had, they would have mentioned it. Wait now, it gets gooder. Jesus had some scathing, sagacious statements to make about the Pharisees also. He was saying, you know what, you Pharisees, you'll swallow a camel and strain at a gnat. You can see a splinter on the last row of this building in somebody's eye, and you missed a 2x4 in your own head. And of all the things that Jesus criticized them for, he never once criticized them from withholding the sacred tenth. It was the expression of a person that worshiped. It was almost implied, you just worship and you're supposed to give a sacred tenth. It's like the Bible, you know, I always tell you, don't get in arguments with people say, I don't believe in God. If they don't believe in God, don't believe in God. There's no need in getting in an argument with anybody that doesn't believe in God. The Bible is not a proof text to go around waving, talking about, but the Bible says if they don't believe in God, they certainly ain't gonna believe in the Bible. Amen. The Bible just makes one big assumption. In the beginning, God. God as creator assumed that all creation got the good sense to recognize him as being God the creator. Romans 1:18 following, and if you reject that, you're just suppressing the truth. Now, this giving business, this is not something haphazard. It's not something that's just emotional and we just throw out there. No, this is planned regularity of giving. With a proportion, I mean, you know, some of you had parents and they said to you, now here's $1, but 10 cents belong to God. And they scared you so much that when you went down the street to get that moon cookie and pickle, and peppermint, you wanted to make sure that it came under 90 cents. Because you know God may not get you, but your mama would have got you if you would have spent the sacred tenth. And many of the people this morning, when I said, who taught you and your hands went up, is true, because you remember, hey, you don't go to God's house without nothing. They would say that. Well, I don't have nothing. Wait, what you mean you don't have nothing? You went to the Screaming Eagle last night. You went to the Cinder Club, you had something. How dare you show up in God's house and don't have nothing? You knew you were going, didn't you? You went to the movie, you had something. Went to the bowling alley, you had something. You knew when you got there, you just couldn't get in. And here God done woke you up and watched over you and kept you. How dare you show up talking about, I don't have nothing. His plan is purposeful and it's sacred. Now, isn't it amazing when it comes to giving how much we have to be motivated by it? But we know what's right, don't we? Imagine at the PTA or the PTO, they call it now. And these parents and teachers and this organization get together and say, the school is dilapidated, it's falling apart. And they say, well, I know how to resolve that. Get a hat and pass the hat. That school gonna collapse. So government doesn't chance that. There's a tax that's told to keep these properties up. You get the idea. April 15th is coming up soon. Tax day. Uncle Sam will get paid. But imagine if, say, well, tell you how we're going to do this. Let's pass the hat on 4th of July, Memorial Day. We're not going to tax anymore for infrastructure and, bridge and highway and all that, none of that. We're going to pass the hat. Now, if we go to that system, I'm going to recommend don't drive over no overpass. You get the idea. We give the sacred tenth because of who God is. Horace Greeley was an editor for the New York Tribune in 1872, and a lady wrote him a letter and said, Mr. Greeley, listen, we've tried everything at our church, oyster stews, cake and bake sales, fish fries, dances. We've tried everything for people to give. What is your suggestion? And Greeley said, I suggest that you try doing it the way God said doing it for a change. Every year I got somebody telling me, Pastor, we would just ask each member to give $20. If we ask, I said, I don't have but one way to do church, and that's the way God said do it. Either we do it His way or we don't do it at all. Now, I'm done now. This morning, you just have to settle that matter on the sacred tenth. Some of you, you're there. Keep on going. Jesus would say that's just the beginning. So you've been at 10 for the last 10 years, gone up to 11, 12, 13. I don't ever ask you to do anything I haven't done. The last years I've gone up. This year I'm past 20%. I'm trying to do 25% of all of what I have to give back to the Lord. That's me. I'm working on something. I read years ago where J.C. Penney and Hilton and Sam, all them people, they gave 9 and lived off 10. I'm trying to do it. Ms. West said don't. We may have to move in with some of y'all, but I'm trying to do it. Because I want to believe that the God that I preach about is able to keep me and sustain me. I'm not doing it because somebody else don't do it. I'm doing it out of my own spiritual growth to say I want to see what God can do if you are just trusting with what you have. I can tell you this, it ain't come back to me in money, but it's come back in some other ways where the Lord reminds me that He's watching over me.